But is that left to the particular agency performing the analysis on a study-by-study basis?
There's guidelines that's government-wide for all the executive branch agencies, and the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs reviews each agency's analysis and plays a coordinating function. It's a small staff of 50. They don't do their own analysis or come up with new analyses, but they do review the regulatory impact analyses of agencies.
And the other thing is there's a cost-benefit analysis to cost-benefit analysis, in that if you're talking about something that is nationwide, is going to pose billions and billions of dollars in costs, you're going to spend more money trying to do a more thorough cost-benefit analysis than if it's something that's relatively smaller and simple. So they do, and I think they deliberately do more thorough analyses in situations where it's more likely to matter, and where the potential benefits of more cost-benefit analysis outweigh the additional costs.
Yes, it's John McGinnis, Northwestern University. I guess the factual premise of my question is we live in an age of accelerating technology, I guess symbolized by Moore's law and the ever-increasing power of computers. And how is that going to be systematically taken into account in cost-benefit analysis? Let me just give 3 examples of that. The reputable scientist in the New York Review of Books recently wrote a piece saying, well, by 2020, we're likely to have new kinds of plants devised to eat carbon and get rid of all carbon emissions. Well, if that's true, maybe we should just delay all regulations and wait for the carbon-eating plants. And how do we make that decision? More generally, this suggests perhaps that government should not have regulations but have prizes for new technology. That might be the efficient way under cost-benefit analysis. And then when we come to distributional concerns, as the kind that President Obama brings into account, well, if we have technological acceleration, the future generations may be a lot richer than us, so we should wait and let them clean everything up. And that's the distributionally sound matter. I mean, I say these in rather extravagant terms, but to try to force one to consider what are the implications for technological acceleration, and has OMB not only thought through these questions, but do they have the institutional capacity to try to project future technology, which because of acceleration is now more present, so to speak, in our current cost-benefit calculations?
Yeah. I can take a crack at least at some of that. So there's a wide range of ways that technology will influence the future consequences of regulation. There are some attempts already to integrate terms into cost-benefit analysis that take into account technological development. So, for example, and EPA is in the process of actually revising their guidelines on conducting economic analysis of regulation, and they're trying to figure out how to integrate technological innovation. Now, there's lots of different ways that you can do that. You can just put in a exogenous term that just reduces compliance costs over time. That's one way that you could do that. You could put in, alternatively on the other side of the ledger, you could put in a term into the social cost of carbon, which is a tool that's used in economics to identify the expected harm from greenhouse gas emissions. You could put in a term around some expected probability distribution around technological development, and on certain parts of that distribution might be carbon-eating plants that are cheap and that are low investment, and we just kind of get them for free and they solve our problems. But then that probably is not going to be your expected mean technological development. And then on the wealth question, there are terms in cost-benefit analysis to take into account future consumption opportunities. That's the discount rate. We generally discount future benefits because the expectation is that future generations will be richer and that there is a positive marginal, diminishing marginal utility of consumption, and so we do take that into account. Now, there might be disagreement about what growth rates are, and some people might believe that technology is going to massively increase our growth rate and we're going to see consistent 5, 7, 10% growth rates, but that's just some kind of disagreements, empirical disagreements that will 20 years from now, we'll know who is right and who is wrong.
I think you've hit one of the real problems with benefit cost analysis, and that is that it is static. we don't know what's going to be happening in the future. We don't know what opportunities we're closing off by encouraging one particular action versus another. So I think no matter how sophisticated and complicated our equations get, no matter how many factors we can put in them, we're never going to be able to be effective at predicting future changes, which is why I feel very strongly we shouldn't start our decision to regulate with benefit cost analysis, because that really that reflects our assumptions about what the future world will be. And that's why it's very important for benefit cost analysis to be one component of the decision of, certainly, first you should decide whether to regulate based on whether we think there is some externality or some other kind of market failure that means that people, entrepreneurs, can't innovate working on their own without the government stepping in.
Let me just follow up briefly. If predicting the future is so important, is OMB taking any steps to incorporate things like prediction markets into the way they think about cost-benefit analysis?
I don't know I can't remember if the current regulatory guidelines talk about prediction markets or not. It's not. Yeah.
No, it's really one. There's a consistent comment that Bob Hahn makes. Kind of every year, that they should be integrating prediction markets more fully into OIRA. I mean, there's laws that make prediction markets difficult in the United States. If I want to go and make bets about kind of the Senate elections next year on websites, I can't do that because of the law. So there actually has to be statutory changes before they can really be integrated the way they might be.
My question, while not critical of cost-benefit analysis per se, is directed at the difficulty that you might face sometimes in conducting objective cost-benefit analysis when both the cost and the benefit are hard or impossible to measure in quantitative or economic terms. Just two brief examples. One is the Olympic National Park in Washington State, where I live, has 2 power dams that were put in before it became a park. They'll be taken out in 2 years with over $300 million of federal money, ostensibly to restore the salmon. Actually, all the salmon will initially die from the sediment. They're going to hatch new salmon in another river and put them back in, so maybe in 50 years there'll be salmon. However, taking out those power dams will also cause over 150 million pounds of additional CO2 being produced at a power plant somewhere else to pick up the slack from these power dams. Both of these are environmental effects that different environmental groups tend to get very excited about. Another example is a decade or two back in Hawaii, there were several animal protection groups fighting about the extermination of feral non-native pigs. One group wanted to protect the pigs because they're an animal protection group. The other group wanted the pigs killed because they negatively impacted the local fauna and flora. How do you measure the cost-benefit of those kinds of decisions?
Well, regulatory impact analysis isn't just about dollars and cents. So a good regulatory analysis would lay both of those out, quantify what can be quantified, and explain for decision makers what can't be quantified. And I mean, I always like to say it's like Winston Churchill. It's benefit cost analysis is the worst possible way to address regulation, except for all the alternatives. Because what's the alternative if you don't lay out what you know in a transparent framework for decision makers to make the decision? But it's not easy, and I don't think anybody says it's an easy thing to do.
No, well, and the environmental disbenefits concept is oftentimes the place. You know, I mean, those are good examples where you're trading pigs against some other type of animal, and you know, at some point you're going to decide how many pigs are worth something else. But you know, it oftentimes comes up where it's just not. For example, with clean water and clean air, you get similar things. Where if you're trying to regulate power plants, it's basically the same point you made. Where in Riverkeeper, for example, the idea was to make the power plants kill fewer fish. But if you did that, you made them less efficient, and therefore you're going to cause a whole lot more air pollution. And I mean, as long as cost-benefit analysis is being done, it's fairly straightforward. It's sort of the same thing as anything else, where if you're putting benefits, or if you're attributing some amount of value to the one environmental effect versus the other, it's almost easier to trade environmental effects against environmental effects than against dollars, because at least you're not just talking costs anymore. You're ultimately deciding whether you care more about the water or the air, which, I mean, as Susan said, it's hard to do that in monetary terms, but once you face up to what you're doing, you just have to make a decision.